Warning: disturbing content, viewer discretion is advised. Serious, people of Scariest, what is your scariest encounter with the paranormal, aliens, cryptids, and/or other unexplainable phenomena? Part 2. When I was about 4.5 years old, the side of our house with the bedrooms on it faced the property next door and was close to the boundary fence. I was in bed, my bed ran along the wall under the big double window, glass is cheaper than bricks. It was late at night, I woke up, sat up, I looked out the window and could see the light. It got brighter as it got closer. Then the old guy who lived next door came into view. He was wearing his usual shirt with the sleeves rolled up, bib and brace overalls, scraggy straw hat and smoking his pipe. I thought it was odd that he was wearing a hat at night and he was gliding rather than walking. I shrank down under the windowsill, terrified. He didn't turn his head or even seem to see me. It wasn't until he had passed by that I realized I was screaming. My parents came in. Dad asked me what was wrong. I was babbling incoherently. When I calmed down I told them what I had seen. My mother smacked for telling stupid lies, and again for disturbing everyone at 2 a.m. I couldn't have seen the old man from next door, she said. He had died 3 days ago. Dad stayed to tuck me in after my mother flounced out. He hugged me and said he believed me. That was the first time I saw an apparition. It certainly wasn't the last, but it scared me off for life of having my bed under a window. I remember I used to live in this 100-plus-year-old house, and the basement smelled like sulfur and something rotting. One night, or morning, I guess, it was 3:15 a.m., and I heard the doorknob moving up and down, like someone was trying to come in my room. Me, being half awake, went and opened the door to see no one there. I shut it back and went back to my bed. As soon as I was in my bed, I heard something scratching at the foot of my bed. I covered myself with the blankets and tried to ignore it. My lamp on my bedside table launched across the room and shattered everywhere. And then I remember passing out after that. I woke up the next morning to everything being back the way it was, but my mom had a weird dream that I was eaten by a demon. When I was about 10 or so, I was looking out my mom's bedroom window while she watched TV. It was something I did often. It was a large window with no screen, just glass. From it, I could see our backyard, the trees in my next-door neighbor's house, and then a large clear area of the sky. This one evening, I was looking at an object that appeared to be up in the sky. I would say about the same altitude as maybe a commercial airplane. All I could make out was 3 distant flashing lights. And the object was completely stationary, unlike a plane or a helicopter. They blinked steadily, flashing red and blue in succession. I watched for over 20 minutes and even called my mom over to look at it. She slowly and disinterestedly got up and walked over and looked at it for a few minutes and just said it was weird before she went back to watching TV. As time went on, the lights started blinking faster and faster, until finally whatever it was darted insanely quickly to the right, then left then right in a zigzag pattern before shooting off out of my view from the window. I audibly yelled and tried to open the window to stick my head out and look. I yelled to my mom what happened, and she looked out the window again, but by then, it was long gone. That was like 20 years ago, and I still have no explanation for what happened. I'm a 100% logical person who has the nerve to scoff at my sister, who swears up and down that she's seen and been touched by ghosts. I still occasionally have nightmares about the flashing lights I saw in the sky that night. I've never spoken about this, or typed, so this may sound all fucked up, but here goes. I was 5 or 6 and staying at my dad's farm in Northern California, roughly 6 acres and surrounded by a lot of nothing. It was a hot summer day, and I was just standing in the yard out by one of the barns near the edge of the woods. I had been running around playing and was now just killing time, holding a garden hose and just spraying in the air/ground, etc. I was sort of daydreaming and started spraying the dirt a few feet away and began to sort of dig a hole with the stream. The water would push the wet soil away, the hole would fill with dirty water, I'd blast it back out again. I was doing this over and over, making the hole deeper and deeper. Eventually, have no idea how long, but a while, I had sprayed a hole a few feet deep. And I just kept spraying deeper, wider. Suddenly all of the water/mud just fell away. Like the bottom was quickly removed, picture a toilet flushing but very fast, leaving a dark hole about a foot or so across. Suddenly something slapped up against the opening, filling the hole completely. I heard it smack against the wet mud. It was wet and pink like flesh, but had no discernible markings or identifying features. Picture a hole in a sheet with someone's cheek pressed to the other side, but huge. The flesh was flexing somewhat, like what your elbow looks like when you bend it, if an elbow was 2 feet wide. I stood there, literally paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. I am not sure if it was shock, but I wasn't scared so much as stunned. I remember thinking if that's its elbow or shoulder or something, then it has to be gigantic. Suddenly, quick as it appeared, it slipped away. The whole thing lasted maybe a minute. Water filled the hole again. I set down the hose and walked back to the main house, then never spoke of it. Hell, I didn't even remember it until I was in my 30s. No idea what it was to this day, for I'm not a believer in anything supernatural, spiritual, etc. A couple of friends and I were riding in my friend's grandma's SUV when we were about 12 years old, and about to turn down a dirt road to drop someone off. Up ahead, we saw a really bright orb-like light, about eye level from the ground. We all saw it, and thought it was weird, but the grandma kind of brushed it off. As we were driving down the dirt road, I looked out of the window and saw it following alongside us through the middle of a pasture, and as we turned down my friend's driveway, it hovered really fast in front of us, and out of sight. We all sat there, dumbfounded at what we just witnessed. Even the grandma was visibly shaken and said, "What the hell was that?" This was in a very rural area. It cut through several barbed wire fences, always moving at relatively the same speed, and never moving above or below eye level. Nobody we explained it to really thought anything of it. 14 years later, whenever I see my friends, we always talk about it. When I was a kid, I heard a lot of ghost stories from my family. My mom even worked in a haunted theater at one point. And I was honestly jealous I didn't have a scary story of my own. But a few years later, I did. I've actually had a couple encounters throughout my life, but this one has always been the most chilling. I was in middle school at the time, and my parents and I were looking for a new house to rent. We get to this one house and step inside. I immediately felt uncomfortable. The house was unnaturally dark, and the air just felt wrong. My dad wanders off to look around the house. My mom talks with the agent showing us the house, but first points out the room that would be mine so I can check it out. I walk through this dark hallway and step into the doorway. Right across from the door is a large closet with double doors. And standing there is a pair of identical boys, pale and wearing all white. In perfect sync, they turned and looked at me. There was a flash of light, and then they were gone. I bolted over to my mom and told her I wanted to leave. Luckily we didn't move into the house. But I still remember those twin boys looking at me. That was over 10 years ago, and it still gives me chills to this day. This just happened to us a few months ago. We recently had a baby and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in our area so we could have more room. I had heard little things here and there, mainly dishes shifting in the kitchen when nobody was in the kitchen, which I just chalked it up to dishes stacked poorly in the sink. My second biggest thing was one afternoon when I was napping before my shift, graveyards yo. My girlfriend and our baby were at her parents' house and I was alone. I'm lying down, closed my eyes, and I hear 3 solid knocks. Knock 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 on my headboard right above my head. Needless to say I didn't sleep well that night. The third and final straw was this one morning. My friend had gifted us a slider chair to help soothe the baby. One night I was sleeping in the living room after a fight, and I woke up at 6 a.m. to the slider chair tipped over and moved back 2 feet. My girlfriend swears up and down that she didn't move it to fuck with me. My girlfriend's experience now. I was at work, and she called me at 1:30 a.m. She called me panicked, asking if I was home yet. I said no. She sounded terrified at that point. The mobile we have for the baby turned on randomly in the middle of the night. We wound up moving not too long after the chair thing. My house was haunted by some guy growing up. When he was alive, he was a rabbit breeder and pyromaniac. He slowly slipped into insanity and locked himself in his house with guns before he committed suicide at age 37. He used to scare my siblings and me constantly, my sister the most since he lived in her closet with our pet rabbit's cage. In our dining room, there was a fireplace with a big 100-pound mirror chained above the mantel. On the mantel was a couple of pictures and a small clock in a glass dome that my parents got as a wedding gift. One time we heard something shatter in the dining room. When we went to go see what happened, the big-ass mirror was at a 90 degrees angle, barely touching the top of the dome of the clock and held in place by the lower chain links. Nothing was broken. There was also one time that me and my sister got home from school, and at the time, we had in St. Bernard. Usually, he would come and greet us, but today he didn't, which was weird. My sister heard shuffling coming from her room where our rabbit was locked up for the day. We only let him out when we were around to keep track of him. When my sister went to go see, she found our dog in the closet trying to eat our rabbit. Nothing happened thankfully, But what was weird was that the rabbit was not only out of his cage that had a lock, but also the sliding door to the closet was wide open, and my sister's door to her room was open. We knew very well who it was. I've posted this before, it's one of my favorite experiences, so here it is again. So this happened 8 years ago this coming October. It was my second date with my now husband at a place called Bolt Camp on the Lewis River in Washington State by Mount St. Helens. Our first date was a day hike to the same place to scout it out for camping, our second was the overnight camping trip. I had a 10-month-old St. Bernard pup, Leo. We brought him along. He told me to buy Leo a backpack, so I did. Bolt Camp is somewhere between 5 and 7 miles from the trailhead. I don't know if you've ever been to the Mount St. Helens area, but it is absolutely beautiful. Giant firs covered in moss, streams, rivers, it's just stunning. Anyway, since we were camping, he packed us a couple of massive backpacks. Beer, whiskey, bedding, food, a little weed, lanterns and flashlights, water, and dog food. Leo got to carry his dog food and some water in his backpack. He hated it at first but acclimated really fast. So, this hike felt like it took literally forever, and it's the most beautiful hike I've ever done. I told you about the fir trees and moss. Well, the sun started to go down and it was shining through the hollows of the trees. It made the stumps look like little fairy houses, with warm fires burning in their hearts. You could 100% picture little fairy folk and hobbits cooking their meals and getting ready for bed. The trail is dirt but there are little wooden footbridges here and there that go over streams and culverts. Every time we would cross one, my date would say watch out for trolls. Which made the fairy tale atmosphere feel even more fairy tale-y. It was taking forever to get to where we were going. He kept telling me, I think it's around this bend, but then it wasn't. It started getting dark, and I'm not kidding, some of the mushrooms started to glow green as it got darker. It was so fucking cool. Yes, phosphorescent mushrooms are a thing. I didn't know either. We finally got there. So Bolt Camp is just another stop on the trail, but it has a wooden shelter and a fire pit. A tree had fallen through the shelter at some point, it was half collapsed with a giant log on it, but still plenty of room for some sleeping bags, a couple of people, and a St. Bernard. The last residents left a half bottle of scotch there, we partook of that and in return left a little baggie of weed hanging from the rafters and several bottles of water. You know, if you take something, leave something. We unloaded our stuff and started a fire and fucking ate. And drank. And smoked some pot and talked and talked and talked. We cooked steaks on rocks and wrapped potatoes in tinfoil and cooked them on the fire. Leo stole potatoes from the fire too, and just laughed and got to know each other, and I'm positive we fell in love that night. Mount St. Helens is cold at night in October. It was clear, but I'm so cold. I eventually fell asleep, and my date tried to keep the fire going. It kept going out. It was a dry night, but for some reason, it wouldn't stay lit. He ran out of the wood we found and started cannibalizing parts of the smashed shelter, and it still wouldn't stay lit. Leo would sometimes growl at whatever he heard or smelled in the woods, so Leo and my date bonded over that. Finally they fell asleep next to me. I had a nasty cough that kept waking me up. I remember trying to cuddle up close to him because it was so cold, but I also didn't want to wake him up with my cough. I liked him so much by that point of our journey. He was sleeping towards the entrance to the shelter, as the protector, and I was sleeping on the inside. So at some point, I woke up hard, wide awake. I was facing away from him, towards the back of the shelter. And I saw a thing. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a spiderweb. Except that it was floating around in the back of the shelter. It was just twisting and turning over, flipping around on itself slowly, literally just floating back and forth inside the shelter. It was so fascinating. I wasn't afraid at all, but I was wide awake and totally entranced. I really wanted to wake him up, but I barely knew him and really liked him and was afraid he either wouldn't see it or would think I was crazy. So I didn't. I watched it for a while and eventually fell asleep. We woke up in the morning, ate breakfast, and hiked back. It was a tough hike, and we had to stop a couple times to drink and eat some energy snacks, but nowhere near did it feel as long as the hike there. We got to the car, loaded it up, and I dropped him at his place. Like I said, we fell in love that night, so we kept dating. A couple of months later, we were reminiscing about our trip, and he told me something. The night after we got back from our trip, he went out on the front porch of the house he shared with his roommates in Portland to have a cig. He saw something in the glow of the street lamp, so he took a closer look. It was a floaty spiderweb thing, twisting and turning slowly. It floated around for a bit and settled in a bush. He went closer to see what it was and saw a pair of glowing red eyes and ran back inside. He said he didn't know what it was but knew he wanted nothing to do with it. I was shocked, but of course, I then took the opportunity to tell him about what I had seen in the shelter the night before. I had never mentioned it, and had never intended to do so. And that's how we discovered that we evidently brought the Bolt Camp spirit back with us from Mount St. Helens and deposited it somewhere in SC Portland, where for all I know it still lurks to this day. If you look up Bolt Camp, you can see pics of the shelter in the state it was when we stayed there, as well as its now restored condition. I also have a UFO story that's pretty interesting.